A woman with frightened eyes stepped off a strange train. Her whole world seemed to have collapsed before her eyes. Abandoned by her ex-husband's family, dragged by a bruised past that had lasted half her life. She chose to run to the Wild West to find the last bit of warmth. But can a mail-order bride find peace in a land of wind, dust, and broken hearts? In that moment, a man stood waiting at the platform, saw the trembling in the strange eyes. He said a sentence that turned her whole life upside down. "Fear has no place in our home." Was that sentence a word of salvation, or just a fragile hope before a life with too many injuries? If it were you, would you have the courage to move into a new home when the past still haunts your every breath? Would you dare to trust again? Even though your heart is tired, come open that door with me. This story may remind you of yourself at some point in your life. If you feel something touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying on this emotional journey. That afternoon. The sky over Red Willow was a pale purple like an old woolen scarf some mother had left on the church steps. The late autumn wind blew gently through the eucalyptus trees on both sides of the road, carrying with it the smell of dry grass, the smell of wood smoke, and the very typical chill of the west as the sunset began to fall. The train from the east was running slower than usual. The townspeople were scattered along the small platform, and a few horses tied to the wooden fence shook their heads to keep flies away. Smoke from the engine rose, mixing with the late afternoon sunlight to create a thin, mirage-like mist. As the train came to a stop, the doors opened, and passengers began to disembark. Amidst tired eyes, thick coats, and hurried footsteps, a woman appeared, Nora Ellsworth, in her 40s. Her figure was lean but sturdy, like a tree branch that had withstood droughts but still stood firm in the dry ground. Her hair was dark black, tied back with a light brown ribbon. She wore a long ash-gray skirt and a frayed woolen cape, the usual attire of an Eastern woman seeking kindness in the far West. But what made people turn their heads wasn't her clothes. It was her eyes. Those eyes were both wary and tired, as if every step onto the ground was a struggle, as if she didn't know whether this strange land would save her or swallow her up again. Nora clutched the faded brown leather suitcase. It was heavy, not because of the clothes or the belongings, but because of what she carried in her heart, a past she didn't want to recall, a loneliness that had clung to her for years, and a bold decision she still didn't know if she had the courage to go through with. The cold wind blew inside her clothes, making her shiver. "I've come this far," she told herself. "There's no turning back, a few feet away." Elias Morgan leaned lightly against the wooden railing of the platform. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, he wore an indigo tweed shirt and a dark leather jacket worn at the elbows. His cowboy hat was pulled low, half shadowing his eyes, deep and calm as a winter lake. Elias had the appearance of someone who had experienced much loss but still maintained an inner calm. A kind of calm that was neither noisy nor ostentatious. A stillness that made people feel safe, as if standing next to him made the wind a little less cold. When Nora stepped down, he recognized her immediately. Not because of her appearance, but because her arms were shaking slightly, like someone who had been strong for too long and no longer had the strength to hide it. He walked over, each step slow but sure, not in a hurry, not scary. Carrying the temperament of a Western man, steady, responsible, and never infringing on another person's fear. Nora saw him coming, and her heart beat faster. Part of her wanted to run to the train, away from everything beyond her control. Another part hoped that this was the man who could hold her up, even if only for a day. Elias stopped before her, keeping a respectful distance. He took off his hat, holding it to his chest in the old-fashioned manner. "Ma'am, I'm Elias Morgan." His voice was low, warm, and slow. "I've come to get you." Nora said nothing. She tried to keep calm, but her eyes still showed wariness. Elias looked straight into those trembling eyes and spoke in a firm but gentle voice. "I know you've been through a lot to get here, but I want you to understand one thing." He put his hat back on his head and bowed slightly toward her. "Fear has no place in our home. As long as I am standing here, you have nothing to fear." Nora held her breath. The words awakened in her an emotion she had not dared to touch for a long time, a small, fragile hope, like the last embers left in a winter stove. She nodded slightly, as if in agreement, but really trying to convince herself that she could trust this man. Elias gently took the suitcase from her hand. No questions, no curiosity, no judgment. He just did what a good man would do, help without asking for anything in return. "The wagon is over there," Elias said calmly. "If you're ready, we'll go back to Lone Creek Ranch." Nora followed him, her legs trembling slightly. Every step was filled with an invisible fear. Am I running away, or am I starting over? Is this man like them, the ones who saw me as an object? Am I strong enough to trust again? The sound of wagon wheels rolling on dry ground brought her back to reality. Nora sat in the seat, her hands clutching the hem of her robe. Elias sat beside her, close enough to feel her presence but not overwhelming. As he gently pulled on the reins, the old brown horse began to walk, carrying them away from the small train station of Red Willow. The evening wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of wild grass. Nora looked out at the endless fields, her heart still in turmoil. But amidst all her fears, one thing kept coming to her mind, clearer than the sound of the wind, the sound of the horse's hooves, and even the sound of her own heart. Fear has no place in our home. She didn't know why, but that sentence made her want to try to believe it one more time, even if it was just one last time. The wagon pulled out of Red Willow Station and onto a dirt road that led toward the rolling hills. The air was damp with grass and dust, occasionally tinged with the scent of pine resin from distant woods. Nora sat upright, her hands on her knees, trying to maintain her composure despite the turmoil inside her. She looked ahead, watching Elias's hand on the reins, his knuckles firm but not forcing the horse. He handled the horse the way he handled everything around him. No rush, no show of force, no shouting, just a steady presence, enough to let things find their own rhythm. It unsettled Nora in a way she couldn't quite explain. Half of her wanted to believe. Half of her trembled because she couldn't remember the last time she had believed. As the wagon approached a gentle slope, Elias tilted his head and asked, "Are you okay?" Nora. His tone didn't force an answer, just a hint to let her know she wasn't alone. She replied briefly, "I'm fine. I'm just not used to it." Elias nodded, as if he understood that there were some things that didn't need to be said in so many words. She touched the edge of her cloak lightly, finding comfort in the lingering warmth. After a while, the scenery opened up before my eyes. Vast fields of golden grass, large rocks jutting out from the open space, a few wooden houses scattered in the distance, a herd of cows paced across a shallow stream, the water reflecting the sky gradually turning a soft blue. That was when Nora saw Lone Creek Ranch. The 2-story log house stood tall in the middle of the lot, its porch stretched out in front and smoke rising softly from its chimney. The stables were west of the house, and the wooden fence stretched down to the creekside. There was no sense of opulence, just the solidity, cleanliness, and security of places kept by honest hands. When the wagon stopped in front of the porch, Elias got out first. He put his feet down slowly, as if he knew every inch of the ground. Nora hesitated, her eyes on the doorframe, the silence making her breathing heavier. Elias touched the edge of his hat. "Take your time. No one expects you to be strong right away." The words made Nora's heart clench, She told herself she was just tired from the long journey, but deep down, it hit her where it was most sensitive. For years, everyone had told her to be strong, to endure, to be quiet, and this man was telling her she didn't have to be strong right now. Nora stepped onto the ground. The tips of her leather shoes touched the dry earth. A familiar yet strange scent wafted up, the scent of the West she had heard about, now finally touching her. Elias handed her the suitcase, then stepped onto the porch and opened the door, not like he was holding his arms out and waiting for someone to come in, but rather the natural act of a host wanting to make sure the new guest didn't have to touch anything heavy. Nora stepped inside. The smell of old pine and warm bread mingled with the scent of bread, taking her back to a life that was not quite as happy, but also not as judgmental as it would be. Every object was carefully maintained. A large wooden table, a few armchairs, a simple patterned rug on the floor. A stone fireplace stood in the center of the room, a few logs burning red. Elias set the suitcase down near the stairs. "I'll let you choose your room. There are 2 rooms available upstairs, whichever you prefer." Nora hadn't expected this choice. She'd imagined being told where to be, living on someone else's schedule. This small freedom made her a little uneasy, as if she weren't used to being treated with simple respect. Thank you," she said softly. Elias gestured to the kitchen behind the main room. "I have some food prepared. If you're hungry, just ask." Nora nodded. "I can help cook later." "If you want," he replied. "We don't have to rush. Everything takes its own pace here." She looked at his face and suddenly noticed something in his eyes, a trace of sadness but not resentment, like someone who was used to overcoming loss without letting it define him. Nora climbed the stairs, stepping carefully as if afraid to make too much noise. The wood creaked under her feet, the sound not frightening, just like the greeting of an old house after a long absence of new residents. The first room she opened had windows facing the eastern fields. The walls were pale, and the wooden bed was large enough for a person to find a peaceful sleep. Dim light filtered in, covering the brown woolen blanket with a gentle layer. Nora stood still for a long time. She placed her hand on the window frame and looked out at the vast expanse of land dimmed by the setting sun. It was as quiet as a drop of water falling into a lake. Not the cold silence of loneliness, but the silence that opened up the possibility of moving forward. It felt like she was taking a deep breath for the first time in years, but even so, there was still a small doubt, tapping softly in her chest. Part of her was afraid that the past would catch up with her, afraid that the things that had brought her down would repeat themselves. Nora closed the window gently. She went downstairs, walking slowly, careful not to make any noise, as if in a dream unfamiliar with reality. Elias was piling more wood on the stove. He was bent over, his shoulders dark with coal dust, his hair streaked with silver in the firelight. He raised his head only slightly when he heard her footsteps. "Is the room okay?" "Nora, fine." "Quieter than I thought. The land here is wide open. The wind at night gives a desolate feeling, but not to the point of being scary. If you hear anything strange, just say so." Nora was silent for a few seconds. "Have you lived here alone long?" "For a while," Elias replied. "After my wife died, I kept the farm. There was no reason to leave." Nora felt her throat tighten, not from jealousy or worry, but from a sense of unspoken sadness. She looked into his eyes and saw in them the honesty she had thought no man could offer. She answered softly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. "Thank you for picking me up." "I did what I promised," Elias said. "No one should live a life filled with fear." His words echoed to Nora like a spring of water finding its way into a dry land. She bowed her head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Elias stood up. "I made some soup. "If you want some, I want to try." He nodded and walked towards the stove. The soft sound of the spoon hitting the pot sounded like the tapping of another life. Nora placed her hand on her chest, as if to steady her heartbeat. Everything was unusually quiet here, but the deepest part of her was still cautious. Two competing thoughts existed within her. I can feel safe here, and I am not sure I deserve this peace. That question had no answer, but at least Nora knew one thing. She had entered a home where no one forced her to hurry, where no one forced her to be strong with every breath, where silence did not mean judgment. That night, as the flickering firelight reflected off Elias's face and the dark wood wall, Nora felt something she had never dared to dream of. She felt she still had a chance. There was a special kind of silence in the air at Lone Creek Ranch. Not a silence so quiet that it was frightening, but a silence that allowed the heart to settle down, unencumbered by the haunting voices of the past. The first few days on the farm passed easily, though for Nora each day brought its own small challenges to her new life. She rose early, as was her custom from the east, though in the cabin time hardly forced anyone to follow any rigid pattern. Elias was used to waking before the sun, but he never made a sound to wake her. Nora could tell by the heavy but steady thud of his footsteps as he crossed the hall, followed by the clang of metal as he readied his tools for work in the stables. No one forced her to learn how to adapt to the life here. She started to get used to lighting the stove, boiling water on a wood stove, and getting used to the simple dishes typical of the West: a pot of bean soup, a corn pone, or a simple mashed potato dish that Elias jokingly said she could never get enough of. The first time Nora tried to make stew, she stood in front of the pot of beef as if facing a huge task. Dozens of judgments had gone through her mind, saying she wasn't good enough, not skillful enough, not perfect enough to please anyone. She cut the meat unevenly, seasoned it with a little trepidation. The smell of smoke seeping into her hair and clothes made her feel both confused and like a stranger in her new kitchen. Elias walked in as she fumbled with the stirring spoon. He watched her for a moment, then said softly, "Let me taste it." Nora shifted away, confused. "I'm not sure it's edible." Elias scooped up a spoonful, blew on it, and tasted it. The silence that followed made Nora so nervous that her hands clenched into fists. "Better than I thought," he said. "You just need a little more salt. The rest is fine." Nora let out a breath, either relieved or surprised. "I thought you would say more. Here." Elias put the ladle down on the table. No one expects others to do everything perfectly the first time. Everything is learned over time. She looked down at the stew, the flickering flames reflecting off the rims of her eyes, as if the flames themselves were giving her a courage she never knew she had. Over the next few days, Nora got used to helping Elias tend the farm. He showed her how to check the fences after strong winds, how to read the hoof prints of horses to know which ones needed new shoes, and how to listen to the wind to predict the weather. One afternoon, as they walked along the east fence, Nora slipped on the damp ground where the stream had run over the night before. She staggered, almost falling over the edge. Elias immediately reached out to take her arm. However, as soon as Nora regained her footing, he discreetly withdrew his hand, not letting the touch last longer than necessary. "Are you okay?" "Nora, I just lost my balance a little." Elias nodded. "It's slippery here. Just slow down next time." There were no scolding words, no judging glances, just a man caring in the gentlest way possible. It made Nora feel a slight warmth in her chest, like a gentle breath she had forgotten to feel for years. Every time Elias walked ahead, Nora had a moment to observe him. His strong shoulders, his sure gait. His every step showed that this man had lived his entire life with the land, with horses, with the western wind. He had the beauty of experience, of unshown sadness, of a calm born of loss. One afternoon, the two of them sat under a willow tree near a stream. Elias took off his hat and placed it on his knees, while Nora turned a pine cone that had fallen beside him. She listened to the sound of running water and rustling leaves, and felt as if her mind was being cleared of the dense thoughts that had clung to it for years. Nora asked softly, "Elias, are you ever scared?" He tilted his head to look at her, his eyes filled with gentle surprise. Afraid that the things I try to bury will find a way to come back. Elias looked towards the stream, his voice even. There are things I wanted to forget, but the more I wanted to forget, the longer they became shadows. At some point, I realized that I couldn't erase the shadow by running away. I could only stand still and accept that the shadow didn't make me lose my value. Nora was silent. The words seemed to fill a void she had always carried but could not name. "You ask that." Elias turned to look at her, because you were afraid of what Nora tried to answer, but no words came out. All she knew was that there were hundreds of memories inside her that wanted to come out, but were held back by shame and pain. "I just don't want the past to bother anyone anymore," Elias said softly. "You don't have to tell me anything if you're not ready." The way he said it made Nora want to believe in his kindness. No rush, no prying, no attempt to pull her out of her shell. When they returned home, Nora found a covered piece of furniture on the porch. Elias opened it, and it turned out to be a smaller saddle, suitable for beginners. "I've been saving this for a long time," he said. "If you want, I can teach you to ride." Nora touched the soft leather surface, slightly surprised. "You think I can use it? You can do more than you think." That made Nora duck her head to hide a fleeting smile. It was a small one, but one she thought she would never see again. That evening, as a cold wind blew through the crack in the door, Nora felt a familiar shiver run through her. She tried to read, but her eyes were glued to the fire in the fireplace. The image of Elias adding more wood to the fire the night before flashed through her mind, filling her with a feeling that was close to reassurance. Before going to bed, she opened the window a little. Down in the yard, the light from the stables was enough to see Elias's shadow as he checked the stable door. His every movement was calm, slow, unhurried, as if he was used to protecting things that needed to be protected. Nora leaned her forehead against the doorframe, whispering to herself, "It's been so long since anyone has been with me this way. Can I trust this peace a moment later?" When Nora returned to the wooden table near the bed, she saw an envelope placed neatly on it. She jumped slightly. It was not from Elias. The town postman must have brought it when she went with Elias to the stream. The writing on the envelope made her legs run cold. It was from Missouri. Nora clenched the letter in her hand, her chest tightening as if an old, invisible hand were squeezing it. A familiar feeling of unease welled up inside her, stronger than she had prepared for. She didn't open the letter right away. Instead, she set it down on the table, took a step back, and took a deep breath. She didn't know what was inside, but she knew it wasn't good news. The peace at Lone Creek Ranch seemed to have been broken by a tiny crack, so small it was barely visible, but Nora felt it clearly. She sat on the edge of the bed, clasping her hands together, trying to steady her breathing. An old fear arose in her heart. Will the past leave me alone? Will this peace be temporary? The firelight from the fireplace cast flickering shadows on the wall. Nora looked at the fire, then at the envelope. She knew this was inevitable. But at least she was here tonight, in the warm, wooden house. In the air was the breath of a kind man standing in the darkness outside the yard, checking each door. She closed her eyes, telling herself, "I'm not ready to open it yet, but I'm not running anymore." Nora sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, her eyes still glued to the envelope on the wooden table. The small room was so quiet that Nora could hear the wind blowing through the cracks in the window, the sound of wood expanding and contracting with the change in temperature, and her own heavy heartbeat. She reached out to touch the envelope, the rough feel of the paper under her fingertips making her shiver. From Missouri. Just those 2 words were enough to bring back everything she wanted to bury deep down. The cold rooms, the contemptuous eyes of her ex-husband's family, the harsh words that left no external wounds but were enough to suffocate the soul. Nora pulled her hand back. She hadn't opened the letter, not because she wanted to run away, but because she knew that if she opened it while her mind was still shaking, she might lose the fragile peace she had just found in this land. She went downstairs. The fire was still glowing red. The house was warm, but not heavy, like its owner. Elias had returned from checking the stables. He put his hat on the wooden peg by the door, took off his gloves, and laid them on the table, as he had done for many years. Nora walked down slowly. Elias raised his head when he heard her footsteps. "Are you okay?" Nora. His voice was low and calm. He didn't force her to say anything. It felt more like an open porch than an inquiry. Nora stood near the fireplace, letting the warmth soothe the cold in her hands. "I have a letter." Elias was not surprised. "From the old house. From Missouri." Elias nodded, as if he had expected that. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Don't know where to start," Nora replied, her voice low. Elias pulled out a wooden chair gently, motioning for her to sit. He leaned against the edge of the table. "Start with whatever you want. You don't have to tell me everything. You don't have to remember it exactly. Just say what's most pressing." Nora bowed her head, her hands clasped together. "I thought I was used to being looked down upon. But it turns out I'm not. Every time I receive something from that place, I feel like I'm being pulled back into my old life." Elias listened in silence. He had a habit of letting others speak at their own pace. Nora took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I was the daughter-in-law of a wealthy family. People thought that meant I was happy." She looked up, her eyes filled with pain. "But I was more like an object. They saw me as a useless woman who couldn't bear children. They said I didn't bring anything of value." Elias's knuckles clenched slightly as he listened, but he did not interrupt. "My husband died of a fever. From then on, things got worse." Nora continued. "I was blamed. I was treated like I was unlucky. I tried to be patient, to live so that no one would feel uncomfortable. But the more I tried, the more they looked down on me." She paused to catch her breath. "I left, not because I couldn't take it anymore, but because after a while, I realized that if I stayed, I would disappear from myself." Elias looked at her not with pity, but with sympathy. He said slowly, "There are places that make you feel small, but no place has the right to make you feel less valuable." Nora smiled wryly. "All that time spent being criticized made me forget who I was." "At Lone Creek Ranch," Elias replied. "No one has the right to decide your worth but you." Nora looked deep into his eyes. That statement brought tears to her eyes, even though she tried to hold them back. "As for the letter," Nora whispered, "I think they want to take me back to settle the estate. I know they won't leave me alone." Elias frowned slightly, but his voice remained steady. "You don't owe them anything anymore. If they ever bother you, I'll stand by you." Nora paused. "You won't have any more trouble from me." Elias took a step closer. "I don't see you as trouble. I've lost someone I loved before because I wasn't there to protect them. I won't let anything like that happen again. Not to anyone else who's looking for a peaceful life here." Nora felt something press against her chest, like a small wave crashing against the shore. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was warm, light, and somehow very human. A moment later, Nora went upstairs to face the letter. When she opened it, her hand was still shaking slightly. The message was as brief and cold as a legal notice. Her ex-husband's family said that her deceased husband's estate was being redistributed, and they requested her presence. No greetings, no kind words, just orders written in stiff handwriting. Nora put the letter down on the table, feeling like she had been pulled back years of her life. She didn't want to go back there, didn't want to face the eyes that made her afraid to breathe. A light knock on the door made her look up. Elias stood outside, not entering. "If you need anything, I'm downstairs." Just that. No questions about what she was reading, no pressure to share, just to let her know she wasn't alone. The evening passed in a thin layer of stillness. Nora could not sleep. The words of the letter appeared like ink, not yet dry. Request. Return. Presence. She turned, hugging her knees in the darkness. Will the past stop haunting me? Will this place protect me? Will Elias have patience for someone as wounded as me? The barrage of questions made her breathless. Finally, Nora got up, opened the door, and went down the stairs. The light from the fireplace still shone in the living room. Elias sat in a wooden chair, holding an old book in his hand, but his eyes were not on the page. He seemed to be waiting. Nora stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking at him for a long time. "I don't want to go back there," Nora said hoarsely. Elias put the book down on the table and leaned toward her. "No one can take you back to the place that hurt you. No one." Nora walked slowly closer. "But I'm afraid they'll come here. Even if they come, you won't have to face them alone," Elias replied. The simple statement held more power than any promise Nora had ever received in her life. Nora sat down next to him, looking into his fire-gray eyes. "I don't know what to do." "Give yourself time," Elias said. "No one has to get strong right away." Those words were like a thick blanket placed over her heart. A while later, Nora returned to her room. The painful images from the past did not disappear immediately, but they no longer had the chance to roar as before. Something else crept in. Soft but persistent, the feeling of someone standing next to her as she trembled. She put the letter back in the drawer and closed it slowly. Things might get complicated tomorrow or in the days to come, but today she had said what she had kept to herself, and someone listened without judgment. Nora lay her head back on the pillow. For the first time in years, she felt her heart no longer weighed down by an invisible pressure. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing she knew for sure: she was no longer completely alone. The atmosphere at Lone Creek Ranch after Nora confessed her fears seemed different. Not radically different, but a subtle shift, like the thin ice on a stream beginning to crack as spring approached. Nora sensed it in the way Elias's gaze grew warmer, not out of pity, but because he understood a deeper part of her. Understand enough not to violate and enough to protect. In the following days, Nora tried to live as if the letter were just a meaningless piece of paper, but every time she accidentally saw it in the drawer, her chest still tightened. She hid it carefully, not wanting to worry Elias anymore. But Elias had the ability to observe the smallest things, like the way a horse herder can tell which horse is unsteady by looking at the hoof prints. He didn't ask. He didn't force her to open up. Elias's silence became a special tenderness. Nora continued to learn how to cook Western dishes. She tried making cornbread, this time without the burnt edges. When Nora placed the bread on the table, Elias looked on with secret satisfaction. "You're making fast progress," he said. Nora was a little embarrassed. "I just did as you instructed." Elias placed the cake on a plate, cutting off a small portion. "I have only taught you a few things. The rest is up to your patience." The compliment was light as a breeze, but it touched Nora deeply. It had been a long time since she had heard a compliment without sarcasm or hidden meaning. That afternoon, Elias invited Nora to walk along the dirt path that ran along the stream. The banks were lined with weeds that were blooming with tiny white flowers. They walked side by side, close enough that Nora wouldn't feel pressured, but close enough that she could hear the soft rustle of Elias's leather jacket as he walked. Nora said absently, "I used to think I wasn't suited to a deserted place like this." Elias watched the water roll over the flat stones in the stream bed. The West has a way of getting used to it. It begins with a silence that forces you to face yourself. If you can get through it, you will find it more patient than anything. "Like you," Nora blurted out. Elias paused, then smiled slightly. "I'm not very patient. I'm just used to not forcing my way around anyone." Nora realized that this was a rare thing in the men she had met. The man before always wanted to control her every breath, every word, every little thing in the house, but the man beside her seemed to let her choose her own path, ready to slow down if she slowed down, willing to walk beside her if she needed him. They stopped under a large willow tree. Its branches cast soft shadows across the ground and water. Nora reached out and touched the cool trunk. "This place is so quiet. In the old days," Elias said, "my wife liked to sit here and read." She said the wind here sounded like the whisper of the earth. Nora sensed a hint of sadness in his voice. Not the old pain that still gnawed at her, but the kind of memory that made her bow her head in pity rather than pain. She was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry for bringing up old times." "It's okay," Elias said. "It's not sad to remember the dead. It's sad when no one remembers them anymore." Nora felt her heart clench at the calmness and sincerity in that statement. As they turned back, the wind picked up. The leaves rustled as if signaling something was coming. Elias glanced toward the fence, his gaze sharpening. Nora asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing serious," Elias replied, but the tension in his jaw told her that wasn't the whole truth. "I just thought it would be better to check the area near the woods." Elias left for a moment. Nora stood in the yard watching his retreating figure. In that moment, she realized that vague unease had risen again, not because of this letter, but because of an indescribable premonition. Elias turned back when the light had subsided. His eyes were slightly dark, as if he had seen something displeasing. "There are some strange footprints near the north fence." Nora stiffened immediately. "Who could it be? I'm not sure." "Maybe just a hunter," Elias said, his voice softer than usual. "The land up north is less traveled, but I'll keep an eye out." Nora nodded, trying to hide her anxiety. Elias didn't want her to be scared, so she tried to act calm, but the truth was her heart was beating faster. Even though she knew the West was full of strangers, she couldn't help but think of things from her old life. In the evening, Nora took her woolen scarf to the steps to shake off the dust. From a distance, she saw Elias tying his horse to the stake, his movements slow and steady, as if to calm his own thoughts. She called softly, "Elias." He turned, his eyes softening as soon as he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "Nora, I just wanted to know if you were okay." Elias rested his hand on the saddle for a moment before stepping closer. "I'm fine. I was just thinking about those footprints. What do you think is the problem? I don't know yet. But I don't want you to worry." Nora shook her head. "If you worry, I can't rest easy either." Elias looked her straight in the eye. "People can take many things with them when they come to new lands, but whoever is coming here, they won't give you any trouble. You say that as if you know for sure." "I don't know for sure," Elias said, but I know I'll stand up to anyone who makes things difficult for the people who live under this roof. A quiet but powerful statement. Nora felt her heart warm in a strange way. Not long after, a stronger wind blew through the farmhouse. A window opened, startling Nora. Elias immediately went to look. Just a strong wind. He reassured. Nothing else. But when he went out into the yard to make sure everything was securely closed, Nora saw his silhouette standing out in the vast space. At that moment, she understood why people said Western men had a way of standing that even the heavens and earth respected. While Elias was locking the stable door, Nora happened to notice something imprinted on the ground near the porch. The imprint resembled a man's shoe, but was longer and deeper, like the print of someone used to traveling far. She bent down to look. The wind blew a layer of dust over the footprints, blurring their outlines. Nora shivered slightly, not because of the strange footprints, but because of a feeling that her peace might be tested just a moment before it was put to the test again. When Elias returned, Nora stood up straight, hiding her confusion. "What's the matter?" "Nora?" "Nothing," she replied, but her eyes couldn't hide the worry no matter how hard she tried. Elias looked at her longer than usual. "If you see anything strange, tell me." Nora nodded, letting out a small breath. "I will. It's just, sometimes I'm not sure if I'm thinking too much or if there's something there. Your feelings have never gotten you into trouble," Elias said. "I believe that." Nora bowed her head. "Thank you for believing me." Elias smiled very slightly, a rare smile that made others feel protected. That night, Nora lay in her room for a long time before she could fall asleep. The letter in the drawer, the strange footprints in the yard, Elias's slightly strained gaze, all swirled through her mind. At the same time, something else grew, a desire to stay here, to live next to the man whose calmness was enough to calm every storm she had ever endured. Nora closed her eyes and leaned her head back on the pillow. Maybe this is my real home. But then, she heard another question arise. If the past really is coming closer, will I be strong enough to stand still? The red willow had a way of signaling unease, not with obvious signs, but with a feeling as quiet as a cold vein running down your back, waiting for something to happen. These days, Nora felt it with every breath she took. There was no unexpected knock on the door, no stranger outside the fence, but worry crept into her mind like a familiar shadow. Elias didn't say much, but Nora could see the wariness in everything he did. When tying the horse, he looked more closely at the trail leading into town. When pouring her a drink, his hand paused for a moment, as if thinking about something. It wasn't fear, but the instinct of a man used to protecting what was precious to him. A strong wind pushed the clouds across the sky. Nora was hanging clean clothes on the clothesline in the front yard when a figure appeared at the farm gate. A long, dark brown coat, a hat worn low, covering most of the face, and broad shoulders that seemed to dominate the space in front. Nora stopped. The cloth in her hand fell to the ground. She took a small step back, her hands cold even though the wind was not cold. The man took a few steps closer to the fence. His voice was familiar and cold as metal. Nora Ellsworth. Every word he spoke made her skin crawl. Not because of the volume, but because of the memories associated with his voice. Samuel Ellington, her ex-husband's brother. A man who had always treated her as something to be used for his own benefit. A man who did not know the meaning of the word respect. Nora opened her mouth, but no words came out. Samuel looked at her with an unpleasant, judging gaze, as if he were looking at a long-lost object. "I've been looking for you for a long time." At that moment, footsteps sounded from behind. Nora turned her head. Elias was coming from the stables. His eyes immediately darkened when he saw the man standing at the gate. Elias approached Nora. not touching her but close enough to make her feel safe. "Do you want to come in?" Nora. His voice was low and calm, but Nora could hear the tension underneath. She shook her head slightly. For the first time, Nora felt like she didn't want to run away. Samuel crossed his arms, looking at them both with a half-smile. "Aren't you going to say hello to me, Nora? We were family after all." Nora looked up at him, her throat dry. "I don't belong to you anymore." Samuel curled his lips. "You're still on the estate plan. You have to go back to Missouri to sign the papers. No one can refuse." His voice cut deep into old wounds. Nora lost her composure for a moment, but Elias kept his eyes on her. Not touching her, not saying anything, just letting her see he was standing there. Elias turned to Samuel. "She has no obligation to go anywhere. This is her home now." Samuel laughed, his laughter filled with mockery. "Home? She's a penniless widow, a mail-order bride. What is she to this place Elias did not move? She is a respected person." Samuel stepped closer to the fence, his voice growing harsher. "She owes my family a signature. We don't have time to go looking for her everywhere. If she persists, we'll send a lawyer." Nora suddenly felt her legs give way. Everything she had been trying to run away from was standing right before her eyes, reminding her in the same tone of voice just how small she had been. Elias looked at Samuel for a long moment. His voice dropped, so low and cold that the wind seemed to stop blowing around them. No one should send another person back to a place that hurt them. Samuel tilted his head. "Who are you to her to talk like that, the one who stands before the one who thinks he has the right to own another?" Elias replied. Nora felt her breathing slow. What Elias said was neither loud nor flowery, but a shield placed before her, solid and warm. Samuel narrowed his eyes. "She can't make her own decisions. Don't think a few kind words will change the truth." Nora clenched her hands. For a moment, she felt like the little woman she had been. But the feeling didn't last. Elias's presence beside her was like a beacon to hold on to when the tremors came. She took a deep breath. "Samuel, I'm not going back there." He turned to face her. "You have no right to refuse." "Yes," Nora replied, her voice not shaking for the first time. "I have the right to choose my life." Elias looked at her for a second. Pride flashed in his eyes, faint but clear. Samuel looked at them both with annoyance. "You will regret it. I will be back." He walked away, leaving deep boot prints in the ground like slashes across Nora's heart. As Samuel's figure faded, Nora stood still for a long time. Her body felt weak, as if all her strength was draining away. Elias moved closer. "Are you okay?" Nora started to nod, but her throat tightened. "I'm scared. I'm really scared he'll come back." Elias was slow to offer comfort. He understood that the deepest fears often needed time to melt away. Not words. "You don't have to face this alone." Nora looked down at her hands. They were still shaking slightly. "I don't want you to get in trouble because of me," Elias replied in a voice more steady than she had ever heard. "It is trouble to be around those who do not deserve it, but it is not trouble to protect those who deserve it." Nora's heart skipped a beat. Elias tilted his head, looking towards the gate. "I will speak to the town chief about this. No one is allowed to exert pressure in this land without due consideration." Nora shook her head. "I don't want anyone dragged into my business." Elias looked straight at her, his eyes as calm as a lake. "Nora, you have lived too long in fear. Sometimes you have to let others stand with you." Nora sat down on the steps. It felt like all the tension was pulling her down, but something was also lifting her up from within. "Elias," Nora called softly. "Yes. I have never fought against anyone like that. You did better than you thought, Elias said. I saw that. A deep silence fell between them, not heavy but quiet like the moment after a storm has passed. Nora lowered her head into her hands, her breathing heavier than usual. But between those breaths, there was a relief she hadn't expected. She faced the darkness that had kept her silent all her life. When Nora looked up, Elias was still standing there, not taking his eyes off her. He didn't say it would be okay. He just stood there like a solid piece of Western ground, a place where you could stand and not collapse. I don't know where this is going, Nora said softly. Either way, Elias replied, you are not walking alone. There was a promise in that sentence that needed no oath, a warmth that didn't need to touch the skin but still spread to the last breath of fear. Nora looked out toward the road where Samuel had left. The sky and earth at Red Willow were still, but inside her, a new wind was rising. Not a wind of trembling, but a wind of budding determination. Nora couldn't sleep all night after Samuel left Lone Creek Ranch. She lay on her side, her eyes fixed on the small window where pale light fell on the wood-colored wall. Samuel's silhouette, his gruff voice, his disdain, all of it was like old hooks trying to hold her back to a life she had traded her freedom to escape. But in the silence of the wooden room, something else was silently growing. It was the image of Elias standing at the farm gate, not retreating, not afraid, ready to block Samuel from getting any closer. A man like that was enough to make fear no longer completely reign in her heart. When she was exhausted and had fallen asleep for a while, Nora dreamed of a large door. On the other side was a warm light, but Samuel stood in the way like a shadow. She tried to push the door open, but his hand grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back. Suddenly, another hand was placed on hers, steady and silent. When Nora turned around, it was Elias, who only looked at her instead of Samuel. She woke up with her breathing ragged, but also felt a small strength being planted in her heart. Nora went downstairs and saw Elias adding more wood to the stove. The firelight illuminated half of his face, highlighting his experienced features. Elias turned to look at Nora, his eyes soft, a look she had seen many times before but never got used to. You don't have to pretend to be fine, he said. Last night was enough to keep anyone up at night. I just don't see it as over, Nora replied, her hand lightly clutching the edge of her shirt. But it's not the same. Elias put the last log in the fire. You stood up to him. That's not easy for someone as broken as you. Nora was speechless. I did it because you were standing next to me. Elias did not deny or show humility. He simply looked at her for a long time, as if confirming that she had the right to rely on his presence. Both were silent for a moment, only hearing the crackling sound of firewood. Nora said softly, It feels like I don't tremble in the same way anymore. I'm still afraid of Samuel coming back, but I don't feel as weak as before. Elias looked at her with a gaze both heavy and soft. It is the beginning of recovery. You are regaining the part of yourself that was lost. Nora clasped her hands together, and her heart felt warm. The warmth did not come from sweet words or comforting words. It came from silence, from a knowing look, from a calmness that could protect without making others feel small. During the following days, work on the farm helped Nora keep her mind from drifting toward darkness. She and Elias inspected the stables, repaired some termite-eaten timbers, and dried the leather blankets in the sun. There were times when they didn't speak, but the silence wasn't suffocating. It was like the steady flow of a stream in the distance, quiet, but always there, a part of the heartbeat of the place. One afternoon, Nora tried riding the tawny horse that Elias said was the gentlest in the herd. She was a little scared at first, holding the reins too tightly. Elias stood beside her, his hand on the horse's neck. Relax a little. Horses can sense fear from the reiner. Nora took a deep breath, relaxing a little. The horse lowered its head, taking a light step as if it understood Nora needed gentleness. "You did well," Elias said as Nora made her first lap around the field. Nora turned back, a smile playing on her lips. A real smile, not forced. In that moment, Elias's heart softened, but he didn't let it show. Just looking at Nora sitting confidently in the saddle, her shoulders no longer hunched as when she first arrived, he knew she was much further along than she thought. The following nights, the two of them often sat by the fire. Nora read a few pages of an old book, Elias more interested in the sound of the pages turning than in the content. One night, Nora fell asleep in the chair, her head tilted to one side, her hair falling over her forehead. Elias did not wake her. He gently placed the blanket over her shoulders, then sat beside her for a moment to make sure she was not cold. Such silent concern changed Nora's heart little by little. One evening, as they sat near the porch enjoying the breeze, Nora asked something she had wanted to ask for a long time but had never had the courage. "Elias, before you met me, did you ever think you would let anyone else into your life?" Elias sat still, looking out at the valley that stretched before him. The silence stretched so long that Nora wondered if she had said something wrong. He spoke slowly. "I thought my heart had closed since my wife died. I kept the farm only because I promised her. I didn't think I needed anyone else in my life." Nora clutched the edge of her shirt, waiting for the next part as if waiting for a second heartbeat after the first. "But since you came," Elias continued, "I realize there are gaps not because I lack something, but because life is waiting for someone to fill them with their presence." Nora felt a lump in her throat. "I never thought I could do anyone any good." Elias turned to look at Nora. "You bring a peace I didn't know I could feel." Nora bowed her head to hide her red eyes. She didn't want Elias to see her so emotional, but he could see her shoulders shaking slightly. "It's okay, Nora," Elias said in a voice as soft as mist. "Tears don't weaken you." Nora sighed softly. "I'm lost in my emotions." "It's okay. Emotions are something to be passed, not something to be suppressed." Nora looked up at Elias. "You have no idea how important that is to me." The wind blew, carrying the scent of weeds and earth after the day's gusts. In that moment, Nora realized what she had never thought possible. She wanted to stay, not just because she needed shelter, but because she needed Elias in a way deeper than anything she had ever known. Nora took a deep breath. "I want to stay at Lone Creek Ranch, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I feel like I have a place here." Elias didn't reply immediately. He looked at Nora for a second, his eyes filled with relief and something like silent pity. "If that's your choice," Elias said, "Lone Creek Ranch will always be open to you." Nora placed her hand on her chest, where her heart was beating in a rhythm she never knew she could feel. But that peace was only just beginning. In the darkness of the valley, something else was shifting, signaling that these peaceful days were only a stepping stone to a new challenge. Lone Creek Ranch still had a small light on the porch. But in Nora's heart, the light began to shine in a different way. A thin layer of mist hung over Red Willow Valley, giving the impression that everything was holding its breath. The air was slightly chilly, but not sharp, like something was touching the surface of life at Lone Creek Ranch. Nora stood at the window, her hands on the wooden frame, looking at the trees beyond. Her eyes seemed still, but no longer trembled with each breath. In recent days, Nora has noticed a change in herself. The darkness in her heart hasn't completely disappeared, but it no longer occupies her mind as much as it once did. Instead, the peace of Lone Creek Ranch, Elias's presence, and the moments with only the sound of wind and the smell of earth have made her look at herself in a different way. That afternoon, as Nora was collecting wool blankets from the clothesline, the distant sound of hooves made her pause. It was not a hurried or angry sound, just a steady, even beat. But it was an unfamiliar sound. Elias stepped out of the stables, his eyes immediately turning to the road leading to the farm. Nora stood behind him, her heart slowing down. A man on horseback approached, not Samuel. His hair was gray, his figure was dignified, his face much calmer than the men who had made Nora tremble. But there was something pleading and weary in his eyes. Elias stepped forward, keeping a polite yet wary distance. He asked the other man, "Can I help you?" The man took off his hat and nodded. "I am Tom Ellington, Samuel's eldest brother." Nora felt the ground shift slightly under her feet. Tom continued, "I didn't come here to pressure or force Nora. I just wanted to apologize on Samuel's behalf." The room became so quiet that Nora could hear the faint sound of the clothesline swaying in the wind. Tom looked at Nora, his eyes sincere, but with a faint sadness. "I know Samuel came here and said things he shouldn't have. My family treated you badly. I came to tell you that we have no right to ask you to come back. You have the right to choose your own life." Nora stood still, her hands clasped together, not with fear, but with emotion. This was the first time anyone from the Ellington family had admitted they had wronged her. An apology could not erase the deep wounds of the past, but it did lift some of the darkness. Elias stood beside Nora, not interjecting because he knew this moment belonged to her. Nora asked slowly, "Why are you saying that now?" Tom sighed. "Because Samuel doesn't know how to stop. He only knows how to treat people the way my family was taught, not how to see people for what they are. I came here to tell you that the paperwork is in order. You don't have to go back to Missouri, nor are you bound by any responsibilities anymore." Nora felt a weight lift from her chest. It felt as if a burden she had been carrying for years had quietly fallen away. "You don't owe us anything," Tom finished. "If you can forgive, that's great. If you can't, we understand." Nora bowed her head, her voice slow. "I can't promise I can forgive right away, but I know. I won't carry this anger anymore. I need to be free." Tom nodded, his gratitude evident. "I'm glad you found some peace. Lone Creek Ranch seems to suit you." Elias stood beside Nora, calm as ever. Tom looked at him and said with genuine sincerity, "Thank you for standing beside her." Elias replied with a firm but warm look. "She doesn't need anyone to stand in her place. We stand as equals." Tom left with a nod. The sound of hooves faded away, and Nora stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Elias stepped closer. "Nora." She turned, her gaze slowing. "I didn't expect things to end this way. When people face the truth," Elias said, "the end is often lighter than we think." Nora took a deep breath, feeling as if the space before her had opened up. "I feel like an old rope has been untied." Elias looked at her, unable to hide the warmth in his gaze. "You seem much lighter, because now I'm not forced to go back to the place that once scared me." Elias tilted his head, his voice slow and clear. "Now you can choose what you really want." Nora looked into Elias's gray eyes. "You know what I want." Elias did not answer. He waited. This man always waited patiently, not forcing others to speak before they were ready. Nora took a step closer. "I want to stay here, not just because I want to escape the past, but because I have found a place that makes me live again." Elias raised his chin slightly, his eyes softer than they had been in any moment. "Nora, Lone Creek Ranch has changed since you arrived. There are silences that once seemed empty, now seem full. Nora didn't speak, but tears blurred her vision. Elias took a step closer to her. "If you choose to stay," he said in a low, steady voice, "this house will have its own people. Not guests, not temporary residents, but people who belong here." Nora put her hand to her chest to keep her heart from pounding too hard. "I want to be a part of this. Elias. A part of the home you've protected with your life." Elias touched her arm, so gently that he was afraid to hurt her. "You are already a part of me." A warmth spread, not from the touch, but from the tenderness deep inside the man. The red willow wind blew through the long grass. The sheets Nora hung out to dry fluttered, as if celebrating something that had just been undone from her life. Nora felt her heart open like a locked door. "Elias, I want to live here. No matter what. Then Lone Creek Ranch is your home. No need for vows, no need for grand promises. Just one sentence was enough to make spring bloom in Nora's heart." She looked up at the clear sky. In that moment, Nora knew she had passed through the darkest part of her life and found the place where she belonged. Not with screams, not with fierce fighting, but with steadfast silence, with renewed courage, with the man who walked beside her, silently yet stronger than anyone. Lone Creek Ranch became Nora's rebirth, a home without fear, only the warmth of a peace she found through her own choices. And there, in the softest silence of the West, two broken hearts found their voice again without words. Life sometimes makes us go on long detours to find our true home. The story of Nora and Elias reminds us that, despite all the losses, people can still rebuild a home with kindness, patience, and quiet love. Pain does not disappear just because we want to forget, but it recedes when we meet the right person who respects the silence in our hearts. In old age, when everyone has experienced their own wounds, we understand more and more that the most precious thing in life is not what we hold, but the feeling of living peacefully within ourselves. Revival never comes through noise. It comes through small actions, through sincere presence, through gentle but deep words. Thank you for accompanying this story. If the story brings you a little warmth, a little hope, or reminds you of things that once touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to meet on the next humane journeys.